The candles in Blackwood House had not yet been lit when Cordelia Ashford descended the servants' staircase, her arms full of silken tulle, her fingers already aching from the hours of mending that lay ahead. The spring of 1867 had arrived with unusual warmth, and London's season had begun in earnest. A whirlwind of balls, garden parties, and marriage negotiations, from which Cordelia observed everything and participated in nothing. She was 28 years old, unmarried, without fortune or prospects, and she had learned long ago that invisibility was not merely her circumstance, but her survival. The morning light filtered through the narrow windows of the sewing room where she worked, casting pale rectangles across the scattered fabrics. 3 gowns required attention before nightfall: Arabella's ivory satin, torn at the hem during last evening's quadrille; Beatrice's rose silk, which needed additional lace at the décolletage; and Catherine's blue muslin, still unworn but already deemed insufficiently fashionable by Lady Philippa. Her cousins slept peacefully in their chambers above, dreaming of waltzes and proposals, while Cordelia threaded her needle and began the quiet labor that made their dreams possible. She did not resent them. Resentment required energy she could not spare, and besides, what purpose would it serve? Arabella, Beatrice, and Catherine had been raised to expect admiration, to move through ballrooms like swans across still water. They had been given every advantage: dancing masters, French tutors, wardrobes refreshed each season, while Cordelia had been given a corner room, cast-off dresses, and the perpetual reminder that charity, however grudging, should inspire gratitude. The door opened without ceremony, and Lady Philippa Blackwood swept into the room with the particular energy of a woman who had woken with schemes already forming behind her eyes. She was 53, handsome in the severe way of aging beauties, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who had never been denied anything she truly wanted. Her late husband had left her wealthy, her daughters had inherited her looks, and her position in society remained unassailable. The only flaw in her perfect life was the continued presence of her sister's orphaned child, a niece who refused to die, disappear, or make herself useful by marrying the first widower willing to overlook her deficiencies. "You're still working on Arabella's gown," Lady Philippa observed, her tone suggesting that slowness was a moral failing. "The Ashworth ball is this evening, and everything must be perfect. The Duke himself will be attending." Cordelia's needle paused almost imperceptibly. The Duke of Ashworth was a name that echoed through London's drawing rooms like a minor legend. Sebastian Harcourt, 36 years old, obscenely wealthy, notoriously reclusive since the death of his wife 5 years prior. He rarely attended social functions, and when he did, he stood apart from the festivities like a man watching a play he had seen too many times. The matchmaking mothers of London had long since abandoned hope of capturing his interest, though that did not stop them from trying whenever opportunity presented itself. "Arabella will wear the ivory," Lady Philippa continued, circling the room as she spoke. "The colour complements her complexion, and the Duke is said to prefer classical beauty. Beatrice will wear the rose. She photographs well in warm tones, and one never knows who might be taking notice. Catherine," she paused, frowning at the blue muslin. "Catherine will simply have to make do. She's too young to be a serious contender anyway." Cordelia continued her stitching, her expression carefully neutral. She had perfected neutrality over the years, had learned to empty her face of everything that might invite commentary or concern. Lady Philippa preferred her niece blank, useful and silent, a piece of furniture that could mend seams and manage household crises without requiring acknowledgement. "You will attend as well, of course?" Lady Philippa added almost as an afterthought. "Someone must ensure the girls' appearances remain flawless throughout the evening. You can position yourself near the refreshment table. There's always a cluster of wallflowers and chaperones there. You won't be noticed." The words landed without impact. Cordelia had stopped feeling their sting years ago, had developed calluses over the tender places where such remarks once drew blood. She was too old to marry, too plain to attract notice, too poor to matter. These were facts immutable as the seasons, and she had made her peace with them in the quiet hours before dawn, when truth was easier to bear than hope. "Yes, Aunt," she said, and her voice betrayed nothing. The ball that evening was held at Hartwell House, one of London's grandest private residences, and the crush of carriages along the street testified to the evening's importance. Cordelia entered through a side door with her cousins, immediately fading into the background as Arabella, Beatrice and Catherine were absorbed into the glittering crowd. The ballroom blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames reflected in mirrors and crystal, until the entire space seemed to pulse with golden warmth. Silk rustled against silk, jewels caught the light, and the orchestra played with the mechanical precision of musicians who had performed the same waltzes 1,000 times. Cordelia found her customary position, near a column draped in hothouse flowers, close enough to observe her cousins, but far enough to avoid drawing attention. She wore a grey dress that had once belonged to Lady Philippa, outdated, poorly fitted, deliberately chosen to ensure she would never outshine the young women she served. Her hair was pinned simply, without ornament, and her only jewellery was a small locket containing portraits of her parents, long dead and longer mourned. The hours passed in their familiar rhythm. She watched Arabella dance with a succession of eager young men, watched Beatrice charm a circle of admirers with her practiced laugh, watched Catherine stand uncertainly at the edge of the floor, too young to command attention but too old to hide behind her mother's skirts. Lady Philippa moved through the crowd like a general surveying a battlefield, her sharp eyes assessing alliances and opportunities with calculating precision. It was nearly 11 when the room's energy shifted, conversations faltering mid-sentence, heads turning toward the entrance with the synchronized attention of birds sensing a predator. Cordelia followed their gazes and saw him. Sebastian Harcourt, the Duke of Ashworth, stood in the doorway as if uncertain whether to enter or retreat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in evening clothes that fit with the careless perfection of immense wealth. His dark hair was touched with grey at the temples, and his face, handsome in a severe, angular way, wore an expression of such profound disinterest that it bordered on contempt. He surveyed the ballroom the way a man might survey a room full of strangers at a tedious obligation, and then he moved, not toward the dancing or the refreshments or the clusters of eligible young women, but toward a shadowed corner where he could observe without participating. Cordelia watched him settle against a pillar not unlike her own, watched him decline the overtures of several hopeful mothers with minimal courtesy, watched him scan the room with eyes that seemed to be searching for something he did not expect to find. For one brief moment, a heartbeat perhaps less, those eyes met hers. She looked away first, heat rising to her cheeks despite her best efforts. Men like Sebastian Harcourt did not look at women like her, and when they did, it was only by accident, a gaze landing where it had not intended to rest before moving on to worthier subjects. She fixed her attention on Arabella, who was laughing too brightly at something her dancing partner had said, and tried to forget the strange intensity of that momentary connection. The evening continued. Cordelia fetched lemonade for Catherine, repinned a curl that had escaped Beatrice's elaborate coiffure, stood silently while Lady Philippa criticized Arabella's posture within earshot of 3 eligible viscounts. The clock crept toward midnight, and the crowd began to thin, couples departing for late suppers and card games, chaperones gathering their charges for the journey home. She stepped onto the terrace for a moment's respite, the cool night air a relief after the ballroom's oppressive warmth. The garden below was dark, illuminated only by scattered lanterns that cast pools of amber light across the manicured paths. She breathed deeply, allowing herself the luxury of solitude, and that was when she heard the voices. Lady Philippa and another woman, Lady Ashton perhaps, or Lady Melbourne, speaking in the low, confidential tones of intimate gossip just around the corner of the terrace. "She's been useful, I'll grant you that," Lady Philippa was saying, "but one can only tolerate charity cases for so long. I've written to Reverend Whitmore in Devonshire. He's been widowed these 3 years, with 4 children in need of a mother. A woman of Cordelia's age and situation can hardly expect better." "And she's agreed to this arrangement?" the other woman asked. Lady Philippa's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "She hasn't been consulted. What choice does she have? The girl is nearly 30, plain as a sparrow, and without a penny to her name. Whitmore isn't offering marriage so much as employment, but at least she'll have a roof and a purpose. I need her room for Arabella's trousseau. The child requires an entire chamber just for her linens." Cordelia stood frozen, the words settling over her like the first frost of autumn. She had known in the abstract way one knows unpleasant truths, that her position was precarious. But hearing her future discussed so casually, her fate decided without consultation or consideration, struck something deep within her that she had believed long since deadened. Not pain, exactly. She was too practiced at suppressing pain, but something colder, harder, like a door closing on a room she had never been permitted to enter. She did not return to the ballroom. She found a servants' corridor, made her way to the carriage, and waited in darkness until her cousins emerged, flushed and triumphant, their heads full of compliments received and dances remembered. She spoke not a word during the journey home, and no one noticed her silence, because no one ever noticed Cordelia at all. 2 days after the Hartwell ball, Cordelia was dispatched alone across London to retrieve a shipment of French lace that had arrived at a warehouse near the river. It was an errand unsuitable for a gentlewoman, requiring travel through unfashionable districts, where the streets grew narrow and the buildings pressed close. But Lady Philippa had deemed it beneath her daughter's notice and above the servant's competence. Cordelia, existing in the uncomfortable space between family and staff, was the obvious choice. The morning was overcast, the sky a flat grey that pressed against the rooftops like a lid. She sat in the hired carriage with her hands folded in her lap, watching the city transform outside the window, the elegant squares giving way to commercial bustle, the bustle giving way to industrial grit. The lace merchant's warehouse stood near Blackfriars, a respectable establishment despite its location, and the transaction was completed with business-like efficiency. She emerged with the package wrapped in brown paper, climbed back into the carriage, and settled against the worn leather seats for the return journey. She was thinking of nothing in particular, or rather, she was thinking of the future that awaited her in Devonshire, the widowed vicar with his 4 motherless children, the small room she would occupy in a draughty rectory far from everything she had ever known when the accident occurred. It happened with the sudden violence of disasters, a horse bolting in the street, a collision of carts, their carriage driver yanking the reins too sharply to avoid the chaos. The world tilted, glass shattered, and Cordelia was thrown against the carriage door with force enough to drive the breath from her lungs. She heard screaming, her own perhaps, or the horse's, and then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on cobblestones that smelled of rain and horses, and a man was kneeling beside her, with his hand pressed against her forehead. His face swam in and out of focus, dark eyes and strong features, and an expression of concern so intense it seemed almost like anger. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice deep and authoritative. "You're bleeding." She tried to speak, to tell him she was fine, that she needed only a moment to catch her breath, but the words tangled in her throat. Her arm hurt, a sharp, throbbing pain that suggested something more serious than bruising, and there was warmth on her face that she dimly recognized as blood. "The carriage," she managed finally. "Lady Blackwood's carriage. Hang the carriage." The man's tone sharpened. "You've been injured. Lie still." She blinked, and the face above her resolved into familiarity. Dark hair touched with grey, angular features, eyes that held no warmth but burned with unsettling intensity. Sebastian Harcourt, the Duke of Ashworth, was kneeling in the filthy street beside her, his expensive coat pressed against the cobblestones, his hands gentle despite his brusque manner. "Your Grace," she whispered, and tried to rise. He pressed her back down, not roughly but firmly. "I said lie still. My carriage is being brought around. I'm taking you to Ashworth House, and it's closer than any hospital, and my physician will attend to you there. That's not—" She struggled to find the words through the fog in her head. "It wouldn't be proper. Propriety can go to the devil," he said flatly. "You're bleeding from your head and your arm may be broken. If you die in the street because I was worried about propriety, it will haunt me considerably more than any scandal." Before she could protest further, he gathered her into his arms, carefully as if she were something fragile and precious, and carried her to a carriage that had materialized nearby. The interior was dark, upholstered in leather that smelled of sandalwood and tobacco, and she was laid across the seat with a coat bundled beneath her head and a blanket drawn over her shivering body. The journey passed in fragments, the rattle of wheels on stone, the muffled sounds of the city, the Duke's voice issuing orders to unseen servants. She drifted in and out of awareness, and each time she surfaced, she found him watching her with that same intense expression, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't known she presented. Ashworth House rose before them eventually, a massive stone edifice in one of London's most fashionable squares. Cordelia was carried inside by footmen, deposited in a guest chamber that was larger than her entire room at Blackwood House, and attended by a physician who clucked over her injuries with professional concern. Her arm was not broken, merely badly sprained. The cut on her forehead required 3 stitches. She was bruised, shaken, but fundamentally intact. Through all of it, the Duke remained. He stood by the window while the physician worked, his back to the room, but she could feel his attention like heat from a fire. When the examination was complete and the physician departed with instructions for rest and recovery, Sebastian turned to face her at last. "You'll stay here until you're well enough to travel safely," he said. It was not a question. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly." "You can, and you will." He crossed to the chair beside her bed and sat, his movements containing a controlled tension that suggested deep feeling held under rigid restraint. "I watched them pull you from that wreckage. I thought—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "You will stay until I am satisfied that you are fully recovered. My household staff will attend to your needs, and I will send word to Lady Blackwood of your situation." Cordelia stared at him, trying to reconcile this fierce concern with everything she knew of the cold, distant Duke of Ashworth. "Why?" she asked finally. "You don't know me. We've never even been introduced." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "I saw you at the Hartwell ball," he said quietly, standing alone by the pillar, watching everyone else as if you were a visitor from another world. "I wondered who you were. This woman who seemed to carry such stillness in a room full of noise." He paused, studying her face. "And then I watched the carriage fall, and I thought I would never have the chance to find out." The silence stretched between them, weighted with implications neither was prepared to examine. Cordelia looked away first, her cheeks warm despite the chill in her blood. "My aunt will not be pleased," she said softly. "The carriage belonged to her." Sebastian's expression hardened. "You nearly died, and your first concern is her carriage. She depends on it for social engagements. The repairs will be expensive, and she'll—" Cordelia stopped, realizing how her words must sound to a man who had never wanted for anything in his life. "She'll what?" Sebastian pressed. "Punish you? Blame you for circumstances beyond your control?" When she didn't answer, his voice dropped, gentle and dangerous. "Tell me something, miss." He paused. "I don't even know your name." "Ashford," she whispered. "Cordelia Ashford. Tell me, Miss Ashford, when was the last time someone worried about your well-being rather than their own convenience?" She could not answer. She could not remember. The days at Ashworth House passed like a dream from which Cordelia feared to wake. She was given a room that overlooked the garden, dressed in borrowed nightgowns of silk so fine they felt like water against her skin, fed meals that arrived on silver trays, carried by servants who treated her with deference she had never experienced. It was like being transported to a foreign country, where the customs were beautiful but incomprehensible. Sebastian visited every afternoon. At first their conversations were brief, formal, inquiries about her health, updates on the messages sent to Lady Blackwood, who had responded with terse acknowledgement and transparent irritation. But as the days passed, the formality began to erode. He discovered that she read philosophy, Marcus Aurelius Seneca, the Stoics who had taught her how to endure. She discovered that he played piano, though he never performed for audiences, composing melodies that he kept locked away like secrets. On the fourth evening, unable to sleep, Cordelia wrapped herself in a borrowed dressing gown and ventured downstairs to the library she had glimpsed during the physician's visits. The house was silent, the corridors lit only by scattered candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. She found the library without difficulty, an enormous room lined floor to ceiling with books, furnished with leather chairs and Turkish carpets, and the faint scent of old paper and wood polish. And she found Sebastian. He was seated at a grand piano in the corner, his fingers moving across the keys with the unconscious grace of long practice. The melody he played was unfamiliar, something original, she realized, something he had created himself, and it was unutterably sad, a river of sound that spoke of loss and longing and the particular loneliness of beautiful things destroyed. He stopped when he saw her, his hands lifting from the keys as if caught in transgression. "Forgive me," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I couldn't sleep. And I thought—" "Don't." He rose from the bench, but did not move toward her. "Don't apologize. I should be the one asking forgiveness. Playing at this hour, disturbing the household with melancholy." "It wasn't disturbing." She moved further into the room, drawn despite herself. "It was beautiful, heartbreaking, but beautiful." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability quickly masked. "I haven't played for anyone in 5 years. Not since Eleanor." He stopped, the name hanging between them like smoke. "Your wife," Cordelia said softly. "I'm sorry. You must have loved her very much." Sebastian turned away, his shoulders tight beneath his evening coat. "I failed her," he said, the words rough as if torn from somewhere deep. "I was young, ambitious, consumed with matters I thought important. She was lonely, unhappy, and I didn't want to see. By the time I understood how much she needed me, it was too late." Cordelia remained silent, sensing that he needed to speak more than he needed comfort. "She died believing I didn't love her," he continued. "And the truth is worse, that I did love her in my fashion. I simply didn't know how to show it, didn't make time for it. I let her fade away in a house full of servants who couldn't give her what she needed, and when she was gone I realized that everything I had prioritized, the business dealings, the political maneuverings, the endless social obligations, none of it mattered. None of it was worth a single hour I could have spent making her feel cherished." The clock in the corner marked the seconds with soft, relentless precision. Cordelia crossed the room and stood beside the piano, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the grey at his temples, the weight of grief that time had not erased. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "redemption isn't something we find in the dead. Perhaps it's something we build with the living." He looked at her then with an intensity that stole her breath. "You speak as if you've thought about this before." "I've had a great deal of time to think." She met his gaze without flinching. "When you live on the margins of other people's lives, watching becomes a kind of occupation. I've watched people make themselves miserable with guilt, drowning in what they cannot change instead of reaching for what they might still become." "And what have you reached for, Miss Ashford?" The question cut deeper than he knew. She thought of Devonshire, of the vicar she had never met, of the future her aunt had arranged without consulting her. She thought of the grey dresses and the corner rooms and the careful invisibility she had cultivated for survival. She thought of all the reaching she had never done, all the wanting she had learned to suppress. "Nothing," she admitted. "I stopped reaching a long time ago." Sebastian stepped closer, near enough that she could smell sandalwood and ink, near enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat. "Then perhaps we are more alike than either of us realized. Both of us living half-lives, going through motions without expectation." His voice dropped. "Both of us waiting for something we've stopped believing we deserve." The air between them trembled with possibility. Cordelia knew she should step back, should remember her place and his position, and the thousand reasons why this moment could lead nowhere good. But she was tired of stepping back, tired of disappearing, tired of watching life happen to other people while she stood invisible in the shadows. "Your Grace," she began. "Sebastian," he corrected. "Here, now, in this room. Sebastian. Sebastian." His name felt foreign on her tongue, intimate as a confession. "I should return to my chamber." "This isn't proper?" He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "No, nothing about this is proper, but propriety has never made anyone happy, Miss Ashford. It simply made them acceptable." Before she could respond, a noise from beyond the library, a servant stirring perhaps, or a clock chiming in a distant room, broke the spell. Sebastian stepped back, his expression smoothing into the careful neutrality she had seen at the Hartwell ball. "You should rest," he said formally. The physician was clear about the importance of sleep for healing. "Yes," she gathered the dressing gown more tightly around herself. "Of course. Thank you, Your Grace." For the music. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. "Cordelia." She turned. He stood by the piano, silhouetted against the dying fire, and for a moment he looked as lost as she felt. "I would like to play for you again," he said, "if you would permit it." Something cracked open in her chest, some wall she had not known she was still defending. "I would like that very much." He nodded once, and she fled to her chamber, her heart pounding with sensations she had long since taught herself not to feel. On the morning of her 7th day at Ashworth House, Lady Philippa arrived with a carriage and an expression of barely concealed fury. Cordelia had been warned of her coming. Sebastian had sent word the night before, his note brief but weighted with subtext, and she had dressed carefully in her mended grey dress, her hair pinned simply, her face composed into the blankness her aunt expected. The confrontation took place in the drawing-room, a space of pale blue silk and gilded furniture that felt too delicate for Lady Philippa's aggressive energy. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, and Cordelia sat on a settee trying not to tremble. "This is most irregular," Lady Philippa declared, her gaze sweeping over Cordelia with contempt, barely masked by social necessity. My niece has been absent from my household for a week, without chaperone under the roof of an unmarried gentleman. The scandal could ruin my daughter's prospects entirely. There is no scandal, Sebastian replied coolly. Miss Ashford was injured in an accident and required medical attention. My household staff attended to her needs, and my physician ensured her recovery. The circumstances were reported accurately to any who inquired. Reported by whom? Lady Philippa's voice sharpened. By you? A single man with an unmarried woman under his roof? Do you think society will simply accept your version of events? I think, Sebastian said, his tone dropping to something dangerous, that society will accept whatever I tell them. I am the Duke of Ashworth. My word carries weight that your gossip cannot counterbalance. Lady Philippa's face reddened, but she was no fool. She recognized when she had been outmaneuvered, and she adjusted her tactics accordingly. Well, she said, her voice forcibly lightened, I'm grateful for your care of my dear niece, of course. We've been so worried about her, haven't we, Cordelia? Yes, Aunt. The words emerged automatically, stripped of inflection. The carriage is ready whenever Miss Ashford wishes to depart, Lady Philippa continued. I'm certain she's eager to return to her family. Sebastian moved then, crossing the room to stand beside Cordelia's settee. Before Miss Ashford departs, he said, I should inform you that I intend to call upon her this week, formally. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Philippa's mouth opened and closed without sound, her complexion cycling through several shades of disbelief. Cordelia herself sat frozen, uncertain she had heard correctly. Call upon her, Lady Philippa repeated finally. You mean to court her? I mean to visit, Sebastian corrected. Whether courtship develops from those visits remains to be seen, but I find Miss Ashford's company illuminating. I should like the opportunity to know her better. Cordelia felt his gaze on her and forced herself to meet it. What she saw there was not the cold distance of the Hartwell ball, nor even the raw vulnerability of the library at midnight. It was something new, something that looked almost like hope. I would welcome your visits, Your Grace, she said, and her voice did not tremble. Lady Philippa recovered enough composure to manage a strained smile. How delightful. Of course, Cordelia is always grateful for distinguished company. Now, we really must be going, and the girls are expecting us for luncheon. The departure was managed with efficient awkwardness. Cordelia bundled into the carriage before she could exchange more than a formal farewell with Sebastian. But as the carriage pulled away from Ashworth House, she looked back through the rear window and saw him standing on the steps, watching, his figure growing smaller, but his presence somehow expanding to fill the space between them. Lady Philippa did not speak for several blocks. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was cold with calculation. Do not imagine, she said slowly, that this changes anything. The Duke of Ashworth has shown passing interest before, and he has never followed through. You are a novelty, a curiosity created by unusual circumstances. When he realizes what you are, he will lose interest and move on to worthier pursuits. Yes, Aunt, Cordelia said, but for the first time in years she did not believe it. The ton of London had little else to discuss for the following fortnight. The Duke of Ashworth, notorious recluse, sworn bachelor, was calling upon Miss Cordelia Ashford. Not once, but repeatedly, not privately, but in full view of society, at tea, at the opera, at a garden party where he had been observed spending a full hour in her company while ignoring 3 marchionesses and a countess who had positioned themselves strategically in his path. Cordelia moved through these encounters in a state of wonder that she was careful to conceal. Sebastian, for he had become Sebastian in her thoughts, even when propriety demanded formality, had returned to the cool, controlled demeanor she had first observed at the Hartwell ball. But now she could read the subtleties beneath the surface, the slight softening of his eyes when he greeted her, the way his hand lingered a fraction too long when he helped her into carriages, the questions he asked that required her to think rather than merely respond. He wanted to know her, not the grey, invisible woman who mended her cousin's gowns, but the woman who read philosophy and noticed beauty in unexpected places and had learned to survive by becoming small. He drew her out with patience and precision, and each conversation left her feeling more visible than she had felt in years. But she was not the only one watching these developments. At a musicale hosted by Lady Eastwick, Cordelia was standing near the refreshment table when a voice from her past made her blood run cold. "Cordelia! My God! It's really you." She turned, and Marcus Fairfax, the Duke of Thornbury, was standing before her. He had aged in the decade since she had last seen him. The golden boy who had courted her at 18 was now a man of 33, broader through the shoulders, touched with grey at the temples, but his eyes were the same, that particular shade of blue that had once made her heart race, now clouded with something that looked unsettlingly like grief. "Lord Thornbury," she said, and was proud that her voice remained steady. "Marcus," he corrected. "It was always Marcus between us once. That was a long time ago." 10 years. He stepped closer, and she fought the urge to retreat. 10 years, and not a day has passed when I haven't thought of you, wondered where you were, what had become of you, regretted. His voice broke slightly. "I made a terrible mistake, Cordelia. I was young and foolish, and I listened to my family when I should have listened to my heart. I've spent a decade paying for that cowardice." She stared at him, waiting for the old feelings to surge back. The love, the longing, the devastation of his abandonment. But there was nothing, only a faint pity for the haunted man before her, and a clear-eyed recognition that she was no longer the girl who had wept herself sick when he married another. "Your wife," she said carefully. "I heard she passed. I'm sorry for your loss. She was a good woman." Marcus's jaw tightened. She deserved better than a husband who could not stop loving someone else. Cordelia felt Sebastian's presence before she saw him. A shift in the room's energy, a sudden awareness along her spine. He materialized beside her with the smooth efficiency of a man accustomed to commanding spaces, his hand settling at the small of her back with possessive casualness. "Thornbury," he said, his voice pleasant and his eyes glacial. "I wasn't aware you and Miss Ashford were acquainted." Marcus's expression flickered. Surprise, recognition, something darker. "We knew each other years ago, before—" He stopped, reassessed. "Before circumstances changed." "How interesting." Sebastian's hand pressed more firmly against Cordelia's back. "Miss Ashford and I were just about to take some air on the terrace. You'll excuse us." It was not a request. Sebastian guided her away before Marcus could respond, through the crowded room and out into the cool evening air. The terrace was scattered with couples seeking privacy, but Sebastian found a secluded corner where the noise of the party faded to a distant murmur. "He was the one," Sebastian said flatly. "The man who hurt you. I can see it in how you held yourself, in how he looked at you." Cordelia should have been surprised by his perception, but she was learning that very little escaped Sebastian's notice. It was a long time ago. What happened? She considered refusing to answer, maintaining the wall of privacy she had built around her wounds, but Sebastian had shared his own darkness with her, had trusted her with the story of Eleanor and his guilt and his years of self-imposed isolation. She owed him honesty in return. "I was 18. He was the heir to a dukedom, handsome and charming, and he said he loved me." The words came slowly, rusty from disuse. "We planned to marry. His family objected. I had no dowry, no connections, nothing to recommend me except his affection. They pressured him to end the attachment, and he chose his inheritance over me. He married a suitable heiress 3 months later. I never saw him again until tonight." Sebastian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with controlled anger. He was a fool. He was practical. Cordelia managed a small smile. "I've had 10 years to understand the calculations that govern our world. Love matters very little when fortunes and family names hang in the balance. It matters to me." Sebastian turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, his expression was fierce, almost desperate. "I spent 5 years telling myself that emotion was weakness, that caring for another person only led to pain and regret. But these past weeks, with you—" He stopped, struggling for words. "You've made me feel things I thought I had forgotten how to feel. You've made me want things I had sworn never to want again." Cordelia's breath caught. "Sebastian, he came back for you." His jaw tightened. "He's realized what he threw away, and he wants another chance. I saw it in his face. What Marcus wants is irrelevant." "Is it?" Sebastian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the rapid pulse at his throat. "You loved him once. First loves don't simply disappear." "No," she agreed. "They don't, but they can transform into something else. No, wisdom, perhaps, or understanding. What I felt for Marcus was a girl's infatuation with a beautiful dream. What I feel... She stopped, suddenly afraid of the words forming on her tongue. What you feel? He pressed. She looked into his eyes, dark, intense, burning with something that matched the fire kindling in her own chest, and made a choice to stop being invisible, to stop disappearing, to reach for something even if it might destroy her. What I feel for you, she said quietly, is not a girl's dream. It's a woman's recognition of someone whose wounds match her own, someone who sees her, truly sees her, and doesn't look away. Sebastian exhaled as if she had struck him. Then his hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. Cordelia, her name on his lips, was a prayer. I am broken in ways you may not understand. I carry guilt I may never release. I have nothing to offer you but a damaged heart and a determination to be better than I have been. That sounds, she whispered, like more than anyone has ever offered me before. He kissed her. It was soft at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to retreat. But she did not retreat. She rose into him, her hands finding his shoulders, and the kiss deepened into something that was both ending and beginning. Two people who had thought themselves past love, discovering that love had been waiting for them all along. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, the sounds of the party seemed to come from another world entirely. We should return inside, Cordelia managed. People will talk. Let them. Sebastian's forehead rested against hers. I am done hiding. I am done pretending I don't want what I want. Tomorrow I will call on you properly, and the day after that, and every day until you either accept me or send me away. And if I never send you away, he smiled, a real smile, rare and beautiful, then I will spend every remaining day of my life trying to deserve you. They returned to the musicale hand in hand, and if the assembled guests whispered and speculated and stared, neither of them noticed. They had found each other in the shadows, and nothing, not gossip, not propriety, not the ghosts of past failures, would drive them apart. Not even the third Duke waiting in the wings, watching the woman everyone had overlooked become the most desired prize in London. Part 2. The night air was thick with the scent of roses and possibility as Cordelia slipped into the Blackwood Gardens, her heart still racing from the events of the musicale. She had pleaded exhaustion upon returning home, escaping to her chamber before Lady Philippa could interrogate her about the evening's unprecedented developments. But sleep was impossible. Her mind replayed Sebastian's kiss like a melody she could not stop humming, each repetition revealing new notes, new depths of meaning. She had not expected to find him waiting in the shadows. Sebastian stood beneath the old oak tree at the garden's edge, his dark coat blending into the night. He must have followed her from the musicale, must have known she would seek solitude to process what had passed between them. The realization that he understood her so completely, after such a short time, was both thrilling and terrifying. You shouldn't be here, she whispered, even as she moved toward him. If anyone sees, I needed to know. He stepped into the moonlight, and she saw the vulnerability beneath his careful composure. At the musicale, when I kissed you, I need to know it wasn't impulse, that you felt what I felt. What did you feel? He moved closer, and she could see the rise and fall of his chest, the tension in his shoulders. Like drowning, he said. Like being saved. Like finding something I didn't know I had lost. His hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with hers in the darkness. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Cordelia looked up at him. This man who had everything the world valued and yet had spent years convinced he deserved nothing, and understood that her answer would change both their lives. You're not alone, she said. I don't know what this is between us, and I don't know where it leads, but I feel it too. This recognition, as if my soul knew yours before we ever met. Sebastian's breath escaped in a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her closer, wrapping her in his arms, and she let herself be held, truly held, for the first time in years. They stood like that in the garden's darkness, two people who had forgotten how to hope, learning to believe again. Marcus will come for you, Sebastian said finally, his voice rough against her hair. He made his intentions clear tonight, and there will be others. Men who see what I see, who recognize your worth now that it has been made visible. Let them come. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. My heart is not a prize to be competed for. It belongs to me, and I choose who receives it. And have you chosen? I think, she said carefully, "that I am beginning to." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and when they finally parted, the first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky. "I should go," she whispered, "before the household wakes." Sebastian nodded but did not release her hands. "I will call on you this afternoon, formally. I intend to make my intentions clear to your aunt. She will try to discourage you. She believes I am beneath your station. Lady Blackwood's beliefs are of no interest to me." His voice hardened. "You are not beneath anyone, Cordelia. You are the finest woman I have ever known, and I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that the world sees what I see." He disappeared into the shadows, and Cordelia returned to her chamber, with her heart full of something she had almost forgotten the shape of: joy. The Duke of Wycliffe arrived in Cordelia's life like a storm system, sudden, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. Lord Edmund Cavendish was everything Sebastian was not: young, charming, radiantly handsome, possessed of a smile that had reportedly caused 3 debutantes to swoon during the previous season. At 29, he was considered the most eligible bachelor in England, and his sudden interest in the woman everyone had overlooked sent shockwaves through society. He declared himself at the Worthington Ball, 3 weeks after Sebastian had begun his formal courtship. The event was crowded, glittering with candlelight and expectation, and Cordelia had been standing with Sebastian near the orchestra when Edmund cut through the crowd with the unstoppable momentum of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Miss Ashford," he bowed with theatrical grace, "I have waited all evening for the opportunity to introduce myself, and I find I cannot wait a moment longer." Sebastian's posture stiffened beside her. "Wycliffe, I wasn't aware you frequented these events." "I make exceptions for exceptional circumstances." Edmund's eyes never left Cordelia's face. "I confess I came tonight specifically to meet the woman who has captured Ashworth's attention. I expected to find a conventional beauty. You know how these stories usually go. Instead, I find something far more interesting." "Miss Ashford is not a curiosity to be examined," Sebastian said coldly. "No, indeed." Edmund smiled, and there was genuine warmth beneath the charm. "She is, I suspect, the most intriguing woman in this room. Tell me, Miss Ashford, has anyone told you that you have the most extraordinarily intelligent eyes? I've spent years dancing with empty-headed beauties, and I find I'm quite starving for conversation that matters." Cordelia felt Sebastian's tension like heat from a furnace. She placed her hand on his arm, a small gesture of reassurance. "You're very kind, Lord Wycliffe," she said, "but I suspect any intelligence you perceive is merely the reflection of your own wit." Edmund laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "Oh, she's magnificent. Ashworth, I must warn you, I intend to compete for this woman's favor. Fair warning and all that." "Miss Ashford is not a trophy to be won," Sebastian replied, his voice dangerous. "Of course not. She's a person with her own mind and preferences." Edmund's expression sobered slightly. "Which is precisely why I'm telling you my intentions openly, rather than scheming behind your back. Miss Ashford deserves honesty from her suitors, all of them." He bowed again, this time to Cordelia specifically. "I will call on you tomorrow, if I may. I should very much like to know what you think of Aristotle's Poetics. Something tells me your perspective would be illuminating." He vanished into the crowd before either of them could respond. Sebastian turned to Cordelia, his jaw tight. "He's not serious. Wycliffe has never pursued anyone seriously in his life." "Perhaps not." Cordelia watched Edmund's golden head moving through the crowd. "But he seemed sincere tonight." "Cordelia." Sebastian's voice dropped, urgent and almost pleading. "Tell me I have nothing to fear. Tell me that Wycliffe's charm and Marcus's regret and all the others who will inevitably appear, tell me none of them can take you from me." She turned to face him fully, ignoring the curious eyes around them. "Sebastian, I have spent 10 years learning to want nothing, expect nothing, hope for nothing. You taught me that I was wrong, that I am worthy of wanting and expecting and hoping. Do you truly believe I would abandon that lesson for a handsome smile?" The tension drained from his shoulders. "Forgive me, I am not accustomed to caring this much. It makes me behave poorly." "It makes you behave humanly," she smiled, "though I confess I find your jealousy rather flattering." "Enjoy it while it lasts," he muttered. "I intend to give you no cause for insecurity once you are mine." "Am I to be yours, then?" His eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw everything he could not say in this crowded room: the depth of his feeling, the intensity of his commitment, the future he was building in his mind with her at its center. "If you'll have me," he said, "if you'll trust a broken man to learn how to love properly." "I trust you," she whispered. "I trust us." They danced then, and if Edmund watched from across the room, if Marcus brooded near the refreshment table, if Lady Philippa seethed in the corner surrounded by her less fortunate daughters, neither Sebastian nor Cordelia noticed anything but each other. The rumors began 3 days later, whispers that spread through drawing rooms like wildfire, growing more vicious with each repetition. Lady Philippa had finally found her weapon, and she wielded it with the precision of a woman who had spent decades mastering the art of social destruction. The story was simple and devastating. Cordelia had been alone with the Duke of Ashworth for a week, unchaperoned in his private residence. Who knew what had truly occurred? A woman of her age, desperate for a husband, presented with such an opportunity. Surely she had taken advantage. Surely she had compromised herself deliberately, trapping the Duke with scandal. Cordelia first learned of the rumors when she overheard 2 women discussing her at a tea party, their voices carrying with the particular clarity of intentional cruelty. "Of course he's obligated to marry her now," one said. "What choice does he have? His reputation would never survive the scandal of abandoning her after, well, you know." "I heard she practically threw herself at him," the other replied. "Lady Blackwood is devastated, apparently. She took the girl in out of charity, and this is how she's repaid." Cordelia left the tea without speaking to anyone, returning to Blackwood House with her composure intact, but her heart crumbling. She had known Lady Philippa despised her success, but she had not anticipated this methodical destruction of everything she and Sebastian had begun to build. The doors began to close. Invitations that had arrived regularly were now mysteriously lost. Women who had smiled at her last week now turned away when she approached. Even Marcus, who had continued his dogged pursuit, seemed suddenly uncertain, his visits becoming less frequent and his manner more guarded. Sebastian, however, did not waver. "Let them talk," he said, finding her in the garden where she had gone to hide her tears. "Their poison cannot touch us unless we allow it." "It's not about us." Cordelia's voice was raw. "It's about what they're saying about me. That I trapped you. That I'm a schemer who seduced you for your fortune and title. Anyone who knows you for 5 minutes would recognize that absurdity. But they don't know me." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's the problem, Sebastian. To them, I'm the overlooked spinster who suddenly became interesting. Of course, they assume I must have done something manipulative to capture your attention. How else could someone like me attract someone like you?" Sebastian's expression hardened into something fierce and protective. "Someone like you," he repeated. "You mean someone brilliant and brave and beautiful? Someone who has survived a decade of cruelty with her dignity intact? Someone who sees the world more clearly than anyone I've ever met?" He took her hands, his grip almost painful. "You are the finest woman in England, Cordelia. The fact that others failed to recognize it speaks to their blindness, not your worth. The rumors will damage you too," she said quietly. "Your reputation—" "Hang my reputation!" His voice rose with rare anger. "I don't care what they say about me. I care what they say about you, and I intend to silence them permanently." "How?" He was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his expression, uncertainty giving way to resolution. "There's something I must do first, something I've been avoiding for 5 years." He lifted her hands to his lips. "Trust me a little longer. Can you do that?" "Always," she said, though the word felt fragile in her throat. He disappeared for 3 days. No letters, no calls, no explanation. The rumors intensified. Lady Philippa grew bolder, openly speculating that Ashworth had reconsidered, that he had finally seen Cordelia for the opportunist she truly was. Even Edmund's visits tapered off, though he sent flowers with notes that suggested sympathy rather than abandonment. On the 4th morning, every major newspaper in London carried the same announcement. His Grace the Duke of Ashworth formally declares his intention to marry Miss Cordelia Ashford of Blackwood House. His Grace further states that any person who speaks ill of his intended bride will answer directly to him. The wedding will take place at St. Paul's Cathedral in 3 weeks' time. The day Sebastian returned to Blackwood House, Cordelia understood what he had been doing during his absence. He arrived not alone, but accompanied by his solicitor, his personal secretary, and a stack of documents that he spread across Lady Philippa's dining table, with the methodical precision of a general planning a campaign. "These are the terms of my marriage settlement," he informed Lady Philippa, whose face had gone the color of old cream. "Miss Ashford will receive a substantial annual allowance, independent of any funds controlled by myself. Additionally, I have established a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting women in circumstances similar to her own. Women who have been overlooked, undervalued, and dismissed by those who should have protected them." He turned to Cordelia, and his expression softened. "You taught me that redemption is built with the living. I want to build something that matters, something that honors who you are and what you've survived." Cordelia stared at him, overwhelmed. "Sebastian, I'm not finished." He produced a smaller document from his breast pocket. "This is a formal declaration regarding the circumstances of your stay at Ashworth House. It has been witnessed by my physician, my head housekeeper, and 3 members of Parliament who happen to owe me favours. It confirms that you were treated with complete propriety throughout your recovery, and that any suggestion otherwise is malicious falsehood." Lady Philippa found her voice. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular?" Sebastian cut in, his voice cold as winter steel. "Is the systematic humiliation you've subjected your niece to for the past decade. What's irregular is spreading vicious rumors about a woman whose only crime was surviving an accident. What's irregular is using your position to destroy someone who had no power to fight back." He moved closer to Lady Philippa, and though he did not raise his voice, every word carried the weight of absolute authority. "You will cease your campaign against Miss Ashford immediately. You will publicly acknowledge that the rumors were unfounded. You will treat my future wife with the respect her position demands. And if you fail to do any of these things, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure that your daughters never receive invitations to any event worth attending in this city again." Lady Philippa's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Do we understand each other?" Sebastian asked. "Yes," Lady Philippa whispered. "Yes, Your Grace." Sebastian turned back to Cordelia, and the transformation in his face was startling, from ice to warmth, from threat to tenderness. "Now," he said, "I believe I have a proposal to make properly." He knelt. In Lady Philippa's dining room, surrounded by documents and witnesses and a decade of accumulated cruelty, he knelt on the Turkish carpet and took Cordelia's hands in his. "I told you once that I would spend my life trying to be worthy of you," he said. "I meant every word. Marry me, Cordelia. Not because society expects it, not because we need to silence rumors, but because my life without you would be merely existence. And I've had enough of merely existing." Cordelia was crying. She hadn't noticed when the tears began, but she was also laughing, a sound of pure, unexpected joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Sebastian. 1,000 times yes." He rose and kissed her, gentle and passionate and claiming all at once, and if Lady Philippa made a sound of protest, no one heard it over the thundering of 2 hearts finally finding their way home. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, as if the heavens themselves had decided to bless the union. St. Paul's Cathedral was filled to capacity, not with the polite attendance of social obligation, but with genuine interest, genuine curiosity, genuine investment in the fairy tale unfolding before them. The woman no one wanted was marrying one of the most powerful men in England. The overlooked spinster had become the most talked-about bride of the decade. And if some of the assembled guests had once whispered poison about her, they had now recalculated their positions and arrived with smiles and congratulations ready. Cordelia dressed in the chambers set aside for her at Ashworth House, her home now, or soon to be. The gown Sebastian had commissioned was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, designed to make her feel not merely beautiful, but powerful. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself, not because she looked different, but because she looked exactly like who she had always been, finally visible. She walked down the cathedral aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family who truly loved her, but she walked with her head high and her shoulders straight, and with every step she shed another layer of the invisibility that had protected and imprisoned her for so long. Sebastian waited at the altar, and when he saw her, his composure cracked. Not dramatically. He was still Sebastian, still guarded and controlled, but enough. Enough for her to see the tears he refused to shed, the overwhelming emotion he refused to voice. Enough for her to know that this moment meant as much to him as it did to her. The The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and when the bishop pronounced them man and wife, Sebastian kissed her with a tenderness that made several ladies in the congregation reach for their handkerchiefs. "My wife," he murmured against her lips. "My Cordelia." "My husband," she replied. "My Sebastian." They turned to face the congregation, and Cordelia's eyes found Lady Philippa in the crowd, pale, tight-lipped, forced by circumstance to attend and appear supportive. Beside her sat Arabella, Beatrice, and Catherine, all in their finest gowns, all unmarried, all watching their despised cousin ascend to a position they could never have imagined for themselves. Cordelia did not gloat. She did not smirk or preen, or deliver any pointed look of triumph. She simply met her aunt's gaze with perfect serenity, and then looked away, dismissing her from consideration as thoroughly as Lady Philippa had dismissed Cordelia for a decade. It was, everyone agreed later, the most devastating revenge imaginable. Marcus was there too, standing near the back, his handsome face shadowed with loss. When Cordelia's eyes passed over him, he inclined his head, a gesture of acceptance, of letting go. She returned the acknowledgement with a small nod. Whatever they had been to each other, whatever they might have become in another life, was finished now. She hoped he would find his own happiness eventually. She suspected he would spend years searching for it. Edmund caught her eye and winked, irrepressible even in defeat. He had been gracious throughout her engagement, transitioning smoothly from suitor to friend, and she suspected they would remain friends for years to come. Some men knew how to lose with dignity. The reception at Ashworth House was elegant and restrained, exactly as Sebastian preferred. But when the last guests departed, and the servants retired for the evening, husband and wife found themselves alone in the library where they had first truly spoken, where Sebastian had played piano for her, where they had confessed their wounds and discovered their hopes. "My Duchess," Sebastian said, pulling her into his arms, "I never thought I would say those words again. I never thought I would want to. And now I cannot imagine my life without them, without you." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corners of her mouth. "You saved me, Cordelia. I was drowning in guilt and grief, and you pulled me back to shore." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's what love is supposed to do." They held each other as the candles burned low and the night deepened around them. Two people who had thought themselves past hope, discovering that hope had merely been waiting, patient, persistent, for them to find the courage to reach for it. The epilogue of their story wrote itself in the months and years that followed, each chapter more luminous than the last. The foundation Cordelia established grew beyond either of their expectations, providing education, employment, and dignity to hundreds of women who had been forgotten by society. She became known not merely as the Duchess of Ashworth, but as a voice for the voiceless, a champion for those who had no champions. Sebastian transformed as well. The cold, distant duke who had hidden from the world became a man who laughed, who hosted gatherings, who played piano for anyone who wished to listen. He credited Cordelia entirely, and she credited him in return, and their friends eventually stopped trying to determine who had rescued whom. Lady Philippa's influence waned rapidly after the wedding. Her daughters made acceptable but unremarkable matches: a baron for Arabella, a wealthy merchant's son for Beatrice, a naval captain for Catherine. None of them achieved the brilliance of the cousin they had mocked, and the irony was lost on no one. Marcus eventually remarried, a gentle widow who had loved him quietly for years. By all accounts they were content, if not passionate. It was, perhaps, all he had ever been capable of. Edmund remained a bachelor, charming and elusive, forever searching for a woman who could match what he had glimpsed in Cordelia. He never found her, but he never seemed to mind. Some people, she thought, were meant to be seekers rather than finders. On a spring morning 1 year after their wedding, Cordelia stood in the garden of their country estate in Devonshire, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. Sebastian found her there, as he always found her, drawn by some invisible thread that connected them even when they were apart. "The physician was here," she said without turning. "He confirmed what we suspected." Sebastian's arms came around her from behind, his hands covering hers over their growing child. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. I never thought I would have this." Her voice wavered with emotion. "A husband who loves me, a child on the way, a life that feels like it belongs to me rather than something I'm borrowing from others. It belongs to you." He turned her to face him, his eyes bright. "All of it. You earned every moment of this happiness through years of survival and grace. Never doubt that you deserve it. And you? She searched his face. Do you believe you deserve it? Sebastian was quiet for a moment, and she watched the old shadows flicker across his features, the guilt, the grief, the ghosts that would never entirely release him. But then they passed, and what remained was peace. I'm learning too, he said. Every day with you I'm learning. She kissed him, and the spring sun warmed their faces, and somewhere in the house a maid was singing, and life, improbable, magnificent, hard-won life, continued its patient unfolding. Years later, when their children were grown and their grandchildren filled the halls with laughter, Cordelia would sometimes walk through the garden at twilight and remember the woman she had been, the invisible one, the overlooked one, the one who had learned to want nothing because wanting led only to disappointment. She would remember Lady Philippa's cruel laughter, too old to marry, and she would smile, not with vindication, not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found truth beyond the lies others had told about her. She had been told she was worthless, and she had nearly believed it. She had been told she was invisible, and she had nearly disappeared. But love had found her in the shadows. Love had seen her when no one else would look. Love had lifted her up and shown her that the only opinion that ultimately mattered was her own, and that she had always been enough. Sebastian found her in the garden as the stars emerged, as he had found her countless times over their decades together. His hair was silver now, his step slower, but his eyes still held the same intensity that had first captured her attention at the Hartwell ball a lifetime ago. Thinking again? He asked, taking her hand. Remembering, she corrected. Remembering how far we've come. Far indeed. He lifted her hand to his lips. From a carriage accident to this. From two broken people to whatever we are now. Whatever we are now, she echoed, smiling. What would you call it? Sebastian considered the question with the seriousness he brought to everything. Then he smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. Whole, he said simply. I would call it whole. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, as the night settled gently around them, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. Behind them, the garden where so much had begun and so much had bloomed lay peaceful in the darkness, waiting for tomorrow's sun. And in London, in a modest grave in a churchyard far from fashionable addresses, Lady Philippa Blackwood lay beneath a stone that recorded her name and dates and nothing else. No beloved mother, no cherished friend, no legacy of kindness or grace. She had lived for spite and died alone, and the woman she had despised had long since stopped thinking of her at all. Some victories require no announcement, some revenges write themselves, and some love stories against all odds and expectations find their way to the ending they deserve, not with drama or spectacle, but with the quiet certainty of two hearts that recognized each other in the darkness and chose every day thereafter to walk together toward the light.